Welcome to the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. Today I want to talk about the most mercurial card set or card company to talk about, which is Topps, which is the best thing that ever happened to sports cards and just about the worst. The problem with Topps is that they are a company that needs to be a monopoly. They don't just want to be a monopoly, they need to be a monopoly. And right from the outset, they established that as their goal. They really aren't interested in working for it per se. They just need to have that stature of being the card company for sports cards. And that provided a wonderful gift early on, sort of. Because early on, prior to World War II, there was almost no consistency in cards. Rarely did you have card companies that could string together more than a couple of years. And the card dimensions and the approach to cards was always bouncing all over the place. Play-Ball did start to establish a consistent card design and approach heading into World War II. And so if they had continued with that, who knows where they would have gone with it. But when we came out of the war, Play-Ball, now Bowman, didn't explain. They maintained a consistent creation of cards over the years, but there was no consistency to how the cards were approached. And it wasn't until 1952 when Topps sat down and said, okay, enough of this. We're taking this seriously. Here you go. Here's a serious card, that Bowman finally established a standard, and a standard of a pretty a moderately high quality card at that. So Bowman needed to be whipped into shape. But once they did, they got into the consistent groove of making these cards. And maybe they could have continued pretty well, but the thing was that Topps was hungry. Topps needed to be the card company, or the sports card company, and so Bowman, after a while, just gave them a big price tag, and Topps went ahead and bought it. And then Topps became the standard bearer for sports cards, with almost no exception, all the way into the 1980s. What they were able to do was establish a very well-crafted card overall, that every year they just turned out another design and another design that, with very little competition, if any at all, they didn't really need to work at it. So card collectors didn't get a lot of variety. The cards did look different, but there wasn't a lot of exploration going on with cards. But at least that meant that every single year, generation after generation, card collectors, as they came and they went, there was a consistent experience that they all had. It doesn't matter what period, whether it was the mid-1950s or the mid-1970s, you still experienced the same thing, where you would go, you'd buy the cards of the year, and you would get the cards, and that was just kind of what kids did for generation after generation, even into the 1980s. So there was a lot of consistency that Topps provided, and there was also a reliability to how it was all approached. It was just one card company, so you just went and bought the cards and you did your collecting for the year and you moved on. But it would have been nice to have some variety, because even in the 1980s, in the 1960s, you got inserts. And the reason for inserts was because Fleer and Philadelphia were competing with Topps. So you could see that there were times when Topps actually did have to work a little bit. But it was in the 1980s, when Donruss and Leaf were now giving Topps some pressure, that you got to see a lot of creativity and the desire to make more for people to pursue. Whether that would have worked in the 1960s and 1970s, who knows? But it definitely worked in the 1980s, and Topps needed competition, because if they had competition, they could get really creative. And they definitely did a couple of things in the 1980s that were really impressive and wonderful contributions to the card collecting community, like Gallery of Champions. But they really did need a lot of motivation. And so by the end of the 1980s, Topps continued with the great tradition that they'd always had, which was, we make cheap cards. Period. We just make cheap cards. Maybe we'll actually care about design, maybe we won't. But they were expecting that their reputation was always going to carry on. And that is really the key to what carried them through the 1980s, was that Donruss was more innovative and edgy. Fleer was more classic and well-crafted, and Topps was just kind of the thing you always did. So it worked out well for them. But all three companies were fairly lazy, especially Topps. And so in 1988, when Score jumped into the scene and established a new standard, none of those three companies cared at all. In fact, Bowman was brought back in by Topps, and it was basically Topps doubling down saying, well, we know that you're doing some new stuff and we don't care. We're going with cheap cards. So by 1990, that was the year where there was no hiding it at all. These card companies were starting to get surpassed. And Donruss at least did figure out that they wanted to make a high-end card set that fit in with the new model. And they did do that. So Donruss was starting to wake up. But unfortunately with Topps, they really didn't figure out that they needed to make any advance at all. And 1990 was the year when they kind of got whacked around. And so in 1991, while for some strange reason they still slept at the wheel with both Bowman and the Topps, at least they created Stadium Club, and it showed that if they cared to, they could be impressive. Stadium Club was a pretty shocking card, and the whole industry definitely reacted to it. But Topps was going to have to change everything else, and in 1992, that's exactly what they did. Absolutely what they did. Because they first off changed their main card to something more like what Fleer had been doing, but still, it was an upgrade, but it was all around designing a card for parallels. And parallels was a big, it was a big gift for the industry that was exactly Topps kind of thing. It's the same card, you just add a little gold foil on them and you got some special cards. So you don't spend a lot of effort with design and you just cash your checks. And what's more Topps than that? Now with Bowman, they made big improvements because they cut the production numbers way down and they added a lot of gold foil to it. And so that actually did kind of wake up and start to become something meaningful. But it was the 1992 innovation of Finest that the industry saw that they needed to take things seriously. And in 1993, that's when the hobby realized that this was out there. And this was an absolute game changer. But it also fits right in with Topps Gold as being the perfect example of how Topps really kind of works, because they've created Finest and then they went, well, we can use the same thing and make Bowman's Best. And then in 1996 they went, well, what if we took the regular Topps cards, made a whole nother release with this Finest technology using the same design, and now you've got the perfect gift for Topps. Because now they go out and they make one design and they put out their set with that one design. And then they also make a whole nother release with the same card with the Finest technology with a whole bunch of parallels, and they make more money off of that again. And so it is the least amount of work for the most amount of effect. Between Topps Gold and Finest, they did most of the work they needed to do to be really at this point, the last man standing. The company is lazy. And when pushed, they can be very innovative. And some of the great innovations in cards have come from them. I mean, not any of the really meaningful ones, because they were not involved with the development of draft pick rookies. Although they did make the first ones, but they didn't really go anywhere with it. They weren't at the front end of autographs. Took them quite a while to get to that. And then material cards as well. Took a while for them to get to that. Topps has always been letting most of the big innovations happen by other companies, at least in recent years. The 1990s would not have happened if Topps could have helped it. They would have absolutely squashed it, and the card industry would not have grown very much. But thankfully, we had other people like with Score and with Pro Set that were very eager to think outside of the box, and they really did open up the doors. But Topps, like I said, they are one of the last men standing, and that is because when they make a good decision, they make it as focused as they can and figure out how to maximize it to the full potential. And they have absolutely mastered that. So they're obviously the standard bearer in sports cards. They've done that because they need to be that, but they have not been a blessing for innovation and evolution. In fact, now, at the time I'm doing this video, they are the monopoly in baseball, and then Panini, of course, has, I think they both have football and basketball, and then you have Upper Deck over in hockey, and so you once again have an era where there's no need for innovation because there's no competition. Again, this is exactly what Topps would love to have. They'd love to have all 4 sports, but at least they have baseball, which is all they really care about. And that's kind of the problem that Topps has, is the fact that they don't really care. They're all about prestige. It's like Shaquille O'Neal. If Shaq had really cared about the game and put some effort into it, he'd have been incredible. But he didn't. He was lazy. He didn't really put much effort in. And so there was so much potential that was left on the table. And yeah, that's kind of the way that Topps is. Topps could be a whole lot more impressive, but they're just kind of churning along. So I don't really know how to include them on a Hall of Fame because they belong. But at the same time, to me, they're kind of like the steroids era. They will be in the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. They'll be there, but oh, they're going to have an asterisk, and that's okay. So let's go ahead and put Barry Bonds in the Baseball Hall of Fame because he does belong in there with a big asterisk. Sure, but he belongs to be in there. Topps will eventually be in the Binder of Fame here with a very big asterisk because I hate how they've held the card industry back. But that's going to be down the road. I'm not going to worry about that. Right now, I just wanted to talk about this awkward nature of this particular card brand. There are other card brands that I think that are better for cards, but they're certainly not as symbolic. Topps is the great symbolic card for better or for worse. And that is what I want to say. So this brings to a close the chapter 6 for me of exploring the different features here in the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. This, of course, being Topps. In this particular chapter, I've already elevated Dr. James Beckett to the Binder of Fame, and I've also talked about the David Robinson rookie card. So these are the 3 stories that I got into here with this chapter. If you haven't seen those, definitely check those out. And then, of course, I've got the other chapters that I've done in the past, so you can peruse those as you wish. Other than that, definitely look out for when I bring out this Chapter 7 stories and induction, which is coming up. Yeah, thank you very much for watching.